It is Big 12 Championship Week. It's Conference Championship Week for everybody that has a game, and everybody has a game because everybody makes money off of having those games. Ari Temkin, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
What's up, Smokey? How are you?
Doing well. We're here with everybody, and good to have you back on with us. And as everybody predicted at the start of the year, Iowa State might have been like something that nobody would have that's fine, but Arizona State did it. They're in the championship game, and they're 10-2.
Yeah, what a race to the finish line it was. You know, I was in Waco to see my Jayhawks lose to the Bears on Saturday at McLean Stadium. My first opportunity to go there. Probably won't be rushing to get back as the Jayhawks lost their 14th straight to Baylor, and I think they're 0-11 now in Waco. So that was fun. No, but I mean, watching Saturday night, Smokey, it was pretty wild. I mean, you had the K-State Iowa State game going to the wire. You know, if K-State wins that, then that opens the opportunity for BYU, who kicked off, at around 9:30 Central Time. And then obviously once Iowa State won, BYU couldn't get in, but needed to win in order to keep Iowa State in for the Big 12 championship game. Otherwise, Colorado would have gotten in. So, I think obviously with all the tiebreakers we were trying to work through over the course of the season, there were some weird ones, but it kind of, it kind of came to be pretty clean and cut and dried. So, I mean, it's when you look at the teams projected to be the top 5 of this conference before the season started, 4 of those 5 represent the 4 of the 5 worst teams in the Big 12, and the one that was the exception was Iowa State, who ends up in the Big 12 title game, and then Arizona State was picked by the media to be 16 out of 16 teams. So just an incredible season and turnaround for Kenny Dillingham and company at Arizona State this year.
What do you think about the matchup for this title game? No Jordan Tyson for Arizona State, which is that's gonna suck. That's for sure. But what else about this jumps out at you as matchups? These teams to me appear pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, the Jordan Tyson loss is huge. I don't want to understate that. For Arizona State over the last month plus, they've had a 3-headed monster on offense in Leavitt, Tyson, and Cam Scadaboo. So without Tyson, they're going to have to figure out who's going to emerge at the wide receiver position. But there's just so much that he does that opens up opportunities for Guillory and everybody else. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how what they try to do in the passing game. I mean, Arizona State went from being an elite running attack that could pass the ball at times to being a legitimate 2-headed monster on offense in terms of being able to pass and run, and that's really evolved for them over the last month of the season. So the loss of Tyson cannot be understated. Now, with that being said, Hines Ward is the wide receivers coach, and we did see some guys emerge against Arizona in the Territorial Cup. Now, with that being said, how much stock do you put into a game like that with Arizona, who looked completely checked out? And it was basically 35-0 or whatever it was coming out. So that game wasn't nearly close at all at any point. So it's tough to kind of take away from that, but you're hopeful that Hines Ward can figure out who else they can get on the field to kind of take up for that spot for Tyson, because they're just not as good of a football team without him. The other part, guys, and this is what impacts us living in Texas and certainly recruiting the state of Texas. Jordan Tyson, grew up in the Dallas area. It was brother who played at Texas Tech and is now in the NBA, played at John Paul II. So then you look at Xavier Alford, who's from the Pearland area in Houston, went to Shadow Creek and played in 2 consecutive state championship games at AT&T Stadium. So this is going to be his 3rd chance to play at Jerry World. A lot of Texans on this roster, guys. Arizona State under Brian Carrington have done a fantastic job of recruiting the state of Texas. They have this saying, from Texas to Tempe. Now they're going back, obviously, to Texas for this Big 12 championship game. So as I project this thing out, this spells bad news for us, for Baylor, for Texas Tech, for TCU, for Houston, for teams in the state in the Big 12, because Arizona State has done a really good job in recruiting our kids.
Matt Campbell, we know that the story there has been progressive building and good results, but not great results necessarily. First 10-win season in school history. Now the opportunity for the first Big 12 win in Big 12 championship win in school history. Just what do you make of the job that Matt Campbell has done with Iowa State, Ari?
What's up, Paul? I think I just saw Paul there.
Yeah, shout out to Paul.
Paul's being a handyman right now.
Always.
Yeah. And I fixed it, didn't I? Yeah.
Good work, Paul.
Yeah.
No, Craig, I mean, look, it's nothing short of remarkable what Matt Campbell has done at Iowa State. I mean, I think for those of us that have been watching the Big 12 for the last decade, this isn't a surprise. But if you've been watching Iowa State football, I mean, this is shocking what he's able to do, what he's been able to do, and just build a consistent winner. You know, it's funny. Last year, Iowa State lost a game to Ohio, and there was this unruly Iowa State fan that had this viral video of him saying that Matt Campbell was on the hot seat, and Campbell nearly lost his mind on this guy. And it's a good thing he didn't, because he shouldn't have wasted his breath worrying about this Iowa State fan and for some reason had no idea what he was talking about in terms of the history of Iowa State football. But it's all Matt Campbell. I mean, the first 10-win season in the history of Iowa State football, it had been Indiana, Iowa State, and Vanderbilt, and now it's just Vanderbilt with Indiana and Iowa State both getting those 10-win seasons this year. They have not won a conference championship since 1912 when they were in the Missouri Valley Intercollegiate Athletic Association. So, I mean, it's been 112 years since they've won a conference championship. And, you know, it's like every year Iowa State's in the running to do it. And, yeah, they've had some disappointing losses and they haven't finished things out. And they've had some really good teams that didn't get there. But this is what you do when you're as good of a head coach as Matt Campbell is. You always stay relevant and you figure out a way that, you know, even if you don't have – this isn't the most talented Iowa State team they've had, but they're always relevant. They're always at the top of the conference. And when you do that, you put yourself in position to win championships. And I think that's what we're seeing here. They played for the Big 12 championship in 2020. You know, here they are playing for it again with an opportunity to win it for the first time again in 112 years and go to the playoff with a team that, again, I mean, when you look defensively, they've had all kinds of issues all season. I mean, Kansas ran all over them in what was probably the lowest point of their season. But they've gotten guys healthy and gotten guys back at the linebacker position. I hope Malik Verdon will be available, as he's been a absolute stalwart for them in the back end of their defense all year. He didn't play on Saturday. So, you know, this is, Craig, to your question, a testament to what Matt Campbell has done in terms of being a consistent winner. And like, this is just what you do when you're constantly at the top of the conference or fighting for the top of the conference is, you know, you put yourself in position every year to be in position. And that's exactly what they've done here. You know, Rocco Becht, I think, has been good, but not as good as maybe we thought he was coming into the year. He's had a lot of turnover issues. They've had a ton of pick sixes against them, and K-State should have had probably one or two in that game on Saturday. So that's one of the concerns I have for Iowa State in this game, but they do have an elite pass attack with Jalen Higgins and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, two guys that are 1,000-yard receivers, the only college football program in the nation with 2,000-yard receivers this year. So I'm really looking forward to this game. I think, you know, both teams are certainly not at full strength with the loss of Tyson and then, you know, the injuries that Iowa State has sustained. So we'll see how this thing goes on Saturday at AT&T Stadium.
How many teams in the SEC would be a part of the college football playoff standings if they would only count the hypothetical wins?
Most of them, right?
Yeah, they'd be,
if not all of them.
Yeah, there would be at least 9, because then you have 3 other conference champions.
You know, the thing we talked about today, Smokey, on Big 12 Radio, and I encourage people, if you have not yet already checked it out, to download the TuneIn app and check out Big 12 Radio from 7 to 10 a.m. Every weekday morning, 8 to 11 Eastern time. This is a lot more of a top-heavy conference than everybody expected, and even in terms of perception, where we talk about parity, anybody can win this league, and it's just so wide open. And I mean, nine bowl-eligible teams, Kansas and Cincinnati, both on Saturday, had a chance to make it 11, but they both lost, and so now on the outside looking in. 9 of 16 teams are bowl-eligible, okay? But go further than that. 8 Big 12 teams have at least 8 wins. 3 with 10 wins, 1 with 9, 4 with 8 wins. So, I mean, it's a lot more top-heavy than I think a lot of people expected. This speaks to the level of the conference, right? Like, the conference was thought to be a league of parity, a bunch of, 6-6, 7-5 teams, and yet the worst of the Big 12 from a bowl eligibility standpoint is 8 wins. And that's a big laundry list of teams with Baylor and TCU and Texas Tech that are there at 8 wins. So to me, 3 teams at 10 wins, I mean, this is not as parity-ridden of a conference as we expected. This is a much more top-heavy conference than what we expected. So I think that should wash out in terms of the rankings. I don't think there's any question the Big 12 should have 2 playoff teams. They're not going to, right? They're seemingly barely going to have 1. And at this point, Boise's ahead of them, which is crazy to me. I mean, we literally have an example and I can't remember if we talked about this last week, but we have 3 examples of teams that were at the top of the American Athletic Conference that once they moved to the Big 12, the competition ratcheted up a lot more for them, and they're not as good. There's one bowl opportunity for all 3 of those teams in 2 seasons. Houston's 0 for 2, UCF is 1 for 2, and Cincinnati's 0 for 2 in terms of getting to a bowl. Those were 3 teams at the top of the American Athletic Conference. So we have this literal example of what happens when you move up in terms of conference competition relative to the Mountain West, the American Athletic Conference, any of these other ones, how difficult it is. We're seeing UCF struggle to do it. UCF barely lost any games at home. Now they're a 500 club in program in the Big 12 with their head coach leaving to become the offensive coordinator at Florida State, right? So like, it's just crazy to me how we have this real life world example of what happens when you move up in conference play. And yet the Mountain West is viewed at the same level as the Big 12. It's insane. We have this literal example of how difficult it is to move up in conferences, and they're not using it as an example.
Ari, and look, the SEC's been on their full push this week look, Ole Miss was also the wrong messenger, because Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin both make comments of it like, if we were in this conference or if Ole Miss was in the Big 12, you're telling me this. Well, Ole Miss has lost its last 3 games that they've played against Big 12 opponents, and not in oops-a-daisy, we had a weird game fashion. They've been thumped in all 3 of those games that they've played. This is now a parity situation in college football. Sure, the SEC is still on the top, but they're not like, this isn't Jordan versus the world. This is Jordan versus Malone now.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, and I don't know what is the cause of it. You know, maybe it's the transfer portal, maybe it's NIL, maybe it's the 12-team playoff. You know, it makes me sick to hear Nick Saban and others question what Arizona State or BYU or Iowa State would do in the SEC. Number one, I mean, that's a loaded question, because what schedule are they looking at, right? I mean, there's how many different versions of the same SEC schedule, because you're not going to play every team. And that's also not the point of this exercise, right? If it's what would your record be in the SEC, are we going to play that game with the ACC? Are we playing that game with the Big Ten? You know, it's foolish. I mean, aside from the fact that you could lay it out, and the Big 12 has a pretty positive record versus the SEC in head-to-head matchups, but that doesn't even matter here. The point of the exercise is not to decide how good a team would be in that conference, right? It is how good are you in your conference, and then how does that translate to success in the postseason? It's disturbing, because everything goes back to the playoff. You know, guys, I'll be honest. I was kind of surprised to not see a full McLean Stadium on Saturday. It was not full at all. The upper bowl was not full. No. This is a 7-win team going for 8 wins and having a really good season where they're the number 1 offense last month of the season in college football. To me, this is a symptom of what's happening in college football. Now I get it. People are on Thanksgiving break, whatever. But like, if you're not playing for the playoff, it's like nothing matters anymore. It used to be a big deal if you won 9 games in a season. It used to be a big deal when you beat your rival in a season. It used to be a big deal when you beat all the Texas teams in the season. You know what I mean? Like, these things used to matter. And now it's like less and less they matter, because of the way we talk about these things from a national perspective and how it relates to playoff. It's ridiculous. And it's not just Baylor. I think we see it a lot of places where it's like the fanfare, you're just not showing up in the same way that you used to, especially if you're, quote unquote, not in the playoff chase. And it's like I couldn't believe my eyes at the game on Saturday. And again, this isn't a knock at Baylor. It's just the way the things are right now. It's like, if you're not playing for a spot in the playoff, it's almost as if it doesn't matter. And it's like, this is such, there used to be so many different ways you could win your season in college football. And it's like, those are all dwindling. And I get it. You want to get to the playoff. You want to win playoff games. Everybody wants that. But it's, if your entire lot in life in success in sports is tied to that, and tied to a panel of people that have no idea what they're talking about, and they're completely, blinded by their own preconceived perceptions of this conference, it's foolish.
Ari, you mentioned that Baylor-Kansas game. My goodness, man, what a result for the Bears that I did not see coming in any way, shape, or form. A win, sure, but a blowout win in that fashion, I don't think many were expecting that. KU was favored, going into Waco, was slightly favored. But just your thoughts on what you saw. I mean, that was a screeching halt for the Jayhawks, but they made a hell of a run there in the second half. Season's over, obviously, and the beat goes on for Dave Aranda and company.
And this is where, like, context matters here. Kansas played a really tough schedule. They end up the season 5-7. Not all 5-7s are created equal. Like there's a lot of bad teams in this conference, some at 4-8, but I mean, Kansas is a much better team than the 5-7 record would indicate. Now on Saturday, we saw a lot more of what we had seen previous in the season, which is turnovers and the inability of the Kansas defense to get stops. Now I credit Baylor's offense for the inability of Kansas's defense to get stops, because it's not just Kansas that Baylor did this against. They've been doing this against other defenses for, the entire, basically last 5 weeks. Number one offense in college football last 5 weeks of the season. I've been enamored with what Sawyer Robertson has done with all the different weapons they have at running back. I mean, it was kind of funny how easy it was for Baylor's offense. For me, the biggest surprise was Kansas's offense that couldn't get out of its own way. Jalen Daniels threw another pick. They had a fumble trying to go into the end zone, late in the first half that would have, I think, really cut into that Baylor lead. They just could not get out of their own way, and turnovers were a huge catalyst for this. I credit basically Baylor's offense and Kansas turning the football over for that loss on Saturday. But yeah, I mean, context is important here. I mean, that's a big win for Baylor because Kansas was surging. They'd won 3 straight against top 25 opponents, needed one more win to get to bowl eligibility, and completely got turned away, which is something that had not been done to them, last month of the season. Even in the loss to K-State earlier in this, a month ago, they should have won the game and were in position to win it, but K-State kicks the game-winning field goal. So that's just kind of the way the season went for Kansas. They put together a really, really good month stretch there, but wasn't enough to get them to bowl eligibility, and their season ends at 5-7. I still have all the confidence in the world in Lance Leipold. I do wonder if he'll make changes with Jeff Grimes at offensive coordinator and then, at defensive coordinator. But yeah, pretty wild. Kansas had an opportunity to make real history on Saturday. They'd never won in Waco before, and Kansas has never been bowl eligible in 3 consecutive seasons. So they had a chance to do both of those on Saturday and couldn't. And so now it's once again 2 straight years of bowl eligibility for Kansas, and they have not ever in their history been bowl eligible 3 straight seasons. How wild is that?
It is, and they had the lead 7-0, missed a field goal before that, and actually started well. By the way, next week after we know who's going to represent the Big 12 and whatever happens with the standings, the teams that were in the mix at the top level of the Big 12, I had, me personally, Colorado ranked 11th, Baylor 12th, BYU 15th, and Arizona State 16th in my media poll. And I bet I'm not alone with a lot of that. I had Iowa State 7th, which is not that high itself. I just blanked the bed like I did the year before. I'm going to stop doing them.
Yeah, we all had Arizona State at 16. I mean, I had Houston and Arizona State as the 2 worst teams of the conference. I had West Virginia winning the conference. So, obviously they didn't finish as poorly as Oklahoma State or Utah or Kansas, as many others predicted, but yeah, it continues to be a fool's errand. I remember saying with a bunch of people before the season started, like, the one thing we know for sure is Utah is not going to win the conference. And that's just because the favorite doesn't seem to win this conference year in, year out. Like, that's it. So whoever is predicted to be the favorite next year, just know there's a good chance they're not going to win the conference.
Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
That's just the way that this conference goes. Now, with that being said, this conference needs consistency at the top. I mean, that's part of this perception issue that it has is every year, if you're going to have surprise teams, number one, we know that plays into how they're ranking them. So the fact that Arizona State and BYU were unranked before the season started has hurt them in the AP poll and therefore has hurt them in the playoff rankings. If Oklahoma State and Utah were doing what BYU and Arizona State are doing, they'd be much higher in the rankings. So, and maybe Arizona State's a team that could be consistent, but, we were looking for consistency out of TCU after they won, got to the Big 12 championship, or rather got to the college football playoff. We were looking for consistency, every year it seems like from these programs at the top of the conference, and we haven't seen it yet. And that's the biggest thing in terms of a long-term, perception issue for the Big 12 is getting consistency at the top of the conference.
Ari, a couple of coaching changes. Neil Brown, the straw that broke the camel's back maybe on Saturday with the blowout loss to Texas Tech, he's out. Mountaineers need a head coach, as does UCF, with Gus Malzahn taking the OC job in Tallahassee. Your thoughts? I mean, not surprising, right, that those jobs are changing. Wouldn't necessarily have predicted it last week, but what do you make of both?
Yeah, my guess is that Gus Malzahn knew that he was going to be out, which is the reason he took the preemptive take of going to Florida State for the offensive coordinator job. I just don't buy that Malzahn left the sitting head coaching job at UCF to be the offensive coordinator at Florida State. especially given where Florida State is. Mike Norvell's got to win next year. Otherwise, he's out too. So I definitely thought as the way the season was trending towards the end that UCF would probably be looking for a new head coach. And so I don't buy that Malzahn, was going to continue to be there and left on his own accord. I think he knew the writing was on the wall and he tried to find a good landing spot. With Neil Brown, I think the comments that he made a couple of months ago where he was, basically talking about, hey, come to the game and have some fun. Like, regardless of the truth behind the words that he said and the context, like, it just didn't matter. The optics of it were so bad. And I think this was a fan base that was so apathetic towards him that there was just no way that they couldn't let go of Neil Brown. Neil Brown's been a 500 coach at West Virginia. I think there were times where it looked like they could be, trending on the upward trajectory, but it just didn't happen. He won all the games he was expected to, lost a few of those, and then could not punch up. Could not beat the teams that he needed to beat, like a Penn State or a Texas or an Oklahoma, when teams were ranked ahead. I think he was 0 for when it came to games against top 25 opponents. It'll be interesting to see. I think West Virginia is a really tough place in the Big 12 because there's such a geographic outlier. You look at Arizona and Arizona State, they've got each other, regionally, Colorado and Utah, right? So West Virginia is just such a geographic outlier. It's so difficult because the fan base only really checks in on those regional games, the West Virginia Pitt game, the West Virginia Penn State game. Those games mean so much more to the fans than West Virginia Baylor or West Virginia Kansas or even West Virginia UCF or Cincinnati. So that's just a tough job. I have seen that Andy Kotelnicki, they're interested in talking with him, the former Kansas offensive coordinator. I'm a big Kotelnicki fan in terms of offensive design. I love what he brings to the table, but curious if he could oversee a program in that capacity. But you want a proven program guy. You want a guy that can come in, that can placate to the fans, that placates the right people, that can play the game a little bit better than I think Neil Brown played it, because Brown came in with the right attitude, but I think over time he just lost a lot of his allies and just didn't win enough football games. But I also look at this and say, all right, we took before the season ended 3.5 was the over under in terms of new coaches in the Big 12. And I think I sit here today still taking the under, but it'd be very interesting to see how the rest of this plays out. I don't know that Satterfield is completely set at Cincinnati. I think they're going to take a long, hard look at that. And, you wonder if there's openings elsewhere that might attract some sitting head coaches in the Big 12. I'll still take the under at 3.5, but pretty close there, and I still think it's yet to be decided entirely.
Great stuff, Ari. Thank you very much for your feedback, opinion, and all of that above. Not everybody believes in what we say sometimes on the show, but we have opinions. We appreciate yours, and we'll see you next Monday. We'll know who's going to represent the Big 12 and also what else happens with the rest of the conference or the standings.
Appreciate you guys. Take care.
Thank you. Ari Temkin with us from Big 12 Radio on TuneIn.